The Geopolitics and Empire podcast is joined by Dyer, whose work many listeners, I think, are well aware of. He describes himself as an author, comedian, co-creator, and TV presenter who breaks down a number of subjects from the esoteric, the elite, and geopolitics to philosophy, culture, and theology. He does fantastic work. He reads the elite's boring textbooks and summarizes them for the common folk. You can find him at jaysanalysis.com and Rockfin. Willkommen, Jay. How is the Great Reset treating you?
Good. I mean, well, it's not treating me good, but I'm good. But yeah, I mean, I guess we're in the middle of what we call dystopia now. I mean, Jamie and I have been doing podcasts about movies that are dystopian and trying to figure out how many things in the movies have actually come true. So I would say that, yeah, I feel like I'm living in the middle of a movie, basically.
Yeah, I wanted to pick your brain a bit on that. And I think for me, it's great to finally connect with you. I think we have a lot in common. And I was just telling you I was approved for Rockfin. So now we're fellow Rockfinners. And awesome. I wanted to get your broad view of where we are now today in 2021 and where we're going. A lot of us in geopolitics and empire, I think, understand the basics. You know, technocracy. I've interviewed Patrick Wood, world government. I've interviewed a number of folks, experts, some of the globalists themselves on world government. We know about the banking system, geopolitics, and the current, World War III scenario we find ourselves in. Perhaps to start, of all the topics you've been covering, what is currently most pressing on Jay Dyer's mind?
I think that we are in the middle of a business phase. Basically, it's like rolling out a business plan, and we're at a phase now where the events of the last 2 years were clearly planned many years ahead of time. And I think a lot of people get caught up in the immediacy of what's happening right now, or the news story that's happening right now. But I always like to zoom out and kind of take a big picture, and that's why I try to stay focused on the white papers and where they're trying to keep where they're trying to take things in a long term goal. And I think that we're in the middle of a situation where I think everybody knew that a new O variation was coming. We expected that. They rolled that out perfectly, as everybody thought. And then this is, part of these initial phases of putting into play what the World Economic Forum had on their website last year, which was this giant grid of every area of life being rewritten. And you could zoom in on like any one of the sections of this big circle they had. And you go into that circle and it pulls up another circle. And then you have all these other areas of this domain of life. And it was like everything from education to banking to, food to culture. Every area of life was graphed out, in this World Economic Forum page. Which it wasn't secret, but you had to sign up for email to get access to this page. And that's what we're at is them rolling this mega plan out, which, by the way, that was up and running right when COVID was really getting going in like March, April of last year. So, how do they have all this ready to run, right? If there wasn't a lot of forethought, a lot of foreplanning. And, that's where I think those key documents come into play, like the Rockefeller lockstep document or the projected future scenarios document. That's where other documents that I've been covering recently, I think are more relevant that I kind of overlooked over the years, which is the silent weapons for quiet wars document, which a lot of people kind of thought was maybe in the domain of iffy. We don't really know if this is a real document or not. I think now it is real just due to all of what's happened, in the last couple of years. And then other documents and war game exercise. Everybody knows about Event 201. Everybody knows about SPARS and all that stuff. So I think that those are great windows into the long-term plan, where we're going. That I've been reading the UK Ministry of Defense transhumanist document that they put out a few months ago. And that one's really relevant. It ties into this. And so what we're really seeing is just the overall plan of the last century is being rolled out from the technocrats' perspective through these manage and stage crises. And that's the key thing to understand, is that big crises typically are managed phenomena. They're not always, there may be an organic crisis, but a lot of times, even if it's organic, the plan is then to steer the crisis to some end. And I think that that's what's going on here, is that the Western power block who is really the corporate elite power block, banking elite power block, is behind everything that we're seeing roll out. And so we're right in the middle of that, right before they attempt to do. I'm more and more thinking that it's like Jacobinism, like year zero French Revolution type of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, this seems to be like as you said, over the past century, we've seen little snippets of things that they've tried to do, and this seems to be like the culmination, like the major push forward. And I had a question. You brought up some interesting points. Now they're slipping my mind, but I kind of think of Alice going through Wonderland, and imagining us now going through Klaus Schwab's Wunderland and Great Reset, filled with vaccine passports, social credit, and cyber pandemics. And you've been doing a lot of analysis on the metaverse, and you recently talked about Bill Joy's Wired essay on how the future doesn't need us. And I know the elites have projections of what they want to achieve, which does not mean that they will achieve their goals exactly. At the same time, the Bible paints prophecy that history progressively will get worse until the second coming, and we'll end up in a totalitarian global state for a brief moment in time. So I do see the elites having initial success. Aldous Huxley has talked about the final revolution, and I recently watched an episode of Utopia where everyone was living in this horrific social credit system. And we're starting to see them make life difficult for us with travel restrictions and mandatory QR code apps to do anything. What's kind of your extrapolation of the next few years? What's it kind of going to look like?
One of the overlooked figures who was a bigger and bigger shadow role in a lot of this was Jacques Attali. And in that Bill Joy essay, I didn't expect him to mention his meetings and discussions with Jacques Attali, but what's interesting is that in the Bill Joy essay, he goes through a lot of the material that's very similar to what's in Quigley's Strategy and Hope, and basically admits that the infrastructure of the initial phases of the global government, the technocracy, really arose out of the UN's plans for managing nukes, right? So it's called the Baruch Plan. Bernard Baruch actually set up the plan to manage the nukes, and he says basically what Quigley said, which is that was actually the means by which technocracy would really get rolling, and they would try to erect this system. I see the Cold War as a big part of that business phase as well. So I kind of see these things as big, long chunks. Like the big wars are like these business phases to roll out the next stage of the plan. And what we're in now is that stage where in the next few years, I think what we're going to see is maybe not in the next 2 years, but in the next 10 to 20 years, the projected white paper plans, and especially Attali. Attali is very detailed in what he says and what he would like to see by 2030 and by 2050. And then if you compare that to Ray Kurzweil and his books I've been looking at recently, where he's talking about what he wants to see by 2030 and by 2050, we really are seeing a planet. Attali actually calls it a planetary empire. He says that it's a planetary empire, though, of basically computer dominance. And so you won't have the freedoms that you have now that we all sort of take for granted will no longer even be normative. They will just be seen as sort of, past fancies or whatever. But he says that the final form of the global evolution, according to Attali, is projected to be in place between 2040 to 2050. He says by then, bots will run everything, especially through the avenue of medicine and healthcare. So I think that you're going to see more and more AI, more and more bots rolling out. I mean, already when you go to the doctor, I noticed I went to the doctor, I think a year ago, and I noticed the nurses and the doctors, they're all just searching Google for like what the symptoms are and then like what the drug is to give a person, right? So it's already kind of basically roboticized. I don't know if you've seen Idiocracy, that part where Luke Wilson goes in and they're just like pushing in like on a McDonald's like register, like what his symptoms are. And anyway, that's what it made me think of. So I think that the Attali was one of the figures who said that medicine would be the backdoor by which a lot of the global technocracy would kind of slide into place. Fritjof Capra is another global elitist person who said the same stuff. So that's what we're going to see. We're going to see according to the Lockstep document, more and more automation and techno sizing of every area of life. in the next 10 years. And that is intended to just be part of that lockdown control grid. And I mean, that's really just the last third of Klaus's book is saying the exact same thing too, the fourth industrial revolution. So that's what I expect to see in the next 10 years.
Yeah, my question came back to me. I've had on a number of guests, and we've been just kind of asking the question. I've spoken to Canadian scientist Denis Rancourt and Alex Krainer, a recurring guest, and I recently spoke to Riley Wagaman, who's in Russia, who used to be a deputy editor for RT, and he's saying that Russia is full on implementing all of this stuff, and it seems like everyone's on board: China, Russia, the West. So, do you view it as like all nations are now subscribed to this, or do you see like any division between the West and the East?
It seems like on the COVID plan, there's not much division. Like everybody's sort of signing on to the same thing. And then at the same time, we hear drums of potential war with China, potential war with Russia over Ukraine. So I know I have a lot of people that I talk to that do a lot of high level analysis. I've got a buddy who's a former Marine Corps South China Sea analyst guy, and he's studied that region for 20 years. He's convinced that there will have to be a war as well in the next 10 years. So, and then we know that wars are actually planned out many years ahead of time. So I wouldn't be surprised. So I think that both things can be true. We can have a level to which there's integration and commonality in terms of the long-term CUFID plans, and then at the same time there can be regional and more near-term conflicts and wars that can break out.
And we have the same. I mean, there's a lot going on geopolitically at the moment, and as you say, it really does seem the two hotspots of, you mentioned South China Sea, and now we have Ukraine are ripe for explosion. And I've always had the idea that there's going to be a war by hook or by crook, and I'm now seeing many otherwise academics who have been conservative in their opinion. Generally, most academics are conservative in their opinion, and now they're coming out and saying that they feel like we are in 1913 or 1937. So I don't see anything strange of a third world war breaking out. I just think it's the default nature of humanity, and as you say, they use these wars to achieve their agenda. No.
Yeah, wartime is the greatest time for getting social change and social engineering through. Many of the white papers discuss that. A lot of the big geopolitical strategists discuss that you can get so much more done through wartime. And actually, if you think about it, what they've been doing in 2020 and in 2021 is just another version of that. Because even though it's not war against a foreign enemy, it's war against the invisible enemy. And so it's just merely the fear factor that allows them to reorganize society along these technocratic lines. So we're actually kind of in that scenario now, where it's like a wartime emergency power scenario. And that's exactly what's been going on for the last 2 years, not just in the US, but we've already can see that we're kind of in a global government now. It's already here. The skeletal, outline framework of it has been there for many years. It was all constructed in the 20th century with the international organizations and UN and all this kind of stuff being kind of rolled out from the moneyed power elite in the West, who set all that up with their money and their influence, their power, both bankers and industrialists together. So there's such an amazing commonality when we read the globalist writers of 100 years ago. If you look at Lord Birkenhead's famous essay, and he actually wrote this before H.G. Wells or Huxley. He wrote in, I think, in the teens, the essay for Cosmopolitan, where he said that we'll have a global control grid. You'll get social credits. You'll get babies born in incubators. This is all going to roll out. So this was, that's an older British Empire sort of socialist model, technocratic model. And then Huxley kind of updates it. H.G. Wells updates it, says all the same stuff. And here we are 100 years later, and it's the exact plan rolling out, like almost to the T. I mean, obviously they got a few things wrong, but yeah, I think that what we would expect next would be probably more of the Cyber Polygon type scenarios. I went and read about that exercise, and in that they have basically a fake flag internet outage and attack. I think we've already seen a little bit of that with the pipeline attacks. My suspicion is that the ransomware attacks were probably some sort of private intelligence apparatus that was able to do this. I don't think that it's actually malicious state actors. I think it's I think these are inside types of things, and that's very easy to do with internet and tech type of stuff. So, and Klaus says that the cyber pandemic will be it'll dwarf the present COVID pandemic, make it look like nothing. So if he's any reliable guide, that's what he says is coming next.
Yeah, I'm already having trouble like paying for stuff with my credit card, and I don't know if it's like I've already got a social credit score that they're blacklisting me, or it's just because the banks are becoming stricter because of the fraud and the cyber attacks that are happening. So either way, it's getting hard now to make purchases online. And I mean, so you mentioned they were talking exactly about this scenario over a century ago. How do you think it is that they knew this would come to fruition? I mean, did they know that this technology existed, or they were, they were at the initial stages of this technology? What makes you think that? How could they project out a century, so far?
I think that this is part of where fiction plays a role in this, especially science fiction, which, obviously I'm not saying that because it's true. It's because a science fiction writer says it's true. I don't think that would be silly, but I think that science fiction writers just try to kind of project what the likelihood will be, based on the, quick advance of technology, where it can probably go, what kinds of things we would probably be able to tap into based on the sort of nascent technology that was available at that time. So I just think they're projecting into the future what would likely be the case. I mean, the greatest example that's H.G. Wells, who predicted the human mutations. He predicted nukes. He predicted moon travel. I mean, all these things that we now take for granted as part of modern sci-fi civilization. H.G. Wells wrote about all these things in all his goofy fiction books. So that's what I think is going on. And I think they also have a approach to fiction where, I mean, this is what I got into in my Hollywood books, is that I think they think that that's a much more powerful way to sort of prepare and warm people up for accepting these things over anything to do with nerdy, rational science stuff. They know that most people are going to be interacting with these ideas through fiction, so they will put these ideas in fiction to kind of warm people up, and then it's kind of a symbiotic relationship where people come up with ideas. If you read Annie Jacobson's book on the history of DARPA, she actually talks about a lot of the big Hollywood directors and science fiction writers have been meeting with people in the Pentagon for decades, and they have a back and forth. Like the Pentagon will suggest, oh, put this into your Terminator franchise. And then they'll say, what about soldiers that could do this, fly when they have blah, blah, blah. So it's a back and forth that's been going on between the stage and the intelligence and tech R&D side of the power structure. This has been going on for a long time. So that's what I think is going on. I think they just project ideas in the future. And also, I don't think the British Empire didn't really die. It just kind of morphed into, the American Empire. And I think that, and everybody's compartmentalized, so they don't know what the big overall plans are. And I think shows like yours, and at least what I've seen in your Telegram, like what we talk about is we talk about things that people at the level of like a Kissinger or a Jacques Attali or Brzezinski, that's how they view things. And never in history have we had that kind of a situation where guys like me and you could put out a podcast and talk about things at the level that a Kissinger or Brzezinski do. Now, I'm not trying to say I'm as important as Henry Kissinger. And I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that, 30 years ago, the only people who would have knowledge of and access to the information that we're talking about would be people in international relations, people going into those kinds of jobs and fields, people going into intelligence work. They wouldn't have access to this kind of stuff, which, that's one positive of the internet, is that we do have access to this. So we're at a unique stage now where we can look at all this data, look at what they've been saying for 100 years, the same power structure, see it rolling out. And if people could recognize this, there would be, I think we could change things for the better. But of course, there's so much disinformation, there's so much baloney, there's so much overload of information that it's just really hard to convey this level of information to a mass audience.
Yeah, it's incredible the time that we live in, and we get to. Everything's open source now. And I spent a year. I spent a year in Geneva, the School of Diplomacy, and I was around some of these, elites. I think recently my school, every year they give an honorary doctorate, and this year they gave it to, unfortunately, the Ethiopian, Tedros, the director of the WHO. Yeah. So he was there at my alma mater receiving a doctorate. So just like,
wow.
Well, whatever. I mean, they're a globalist. I mean, it was a great school and great experience, but full on globalist. I was watching a few of your recent interviews, as well as a Dyer classic from 2018 that you posted to Rockfin, where you talk about America being the blueprint and prototype of the New World Order and world government. And this is kind of something I've been looking into recently, which is fascinating, that this kind of patriotism, Americana, revolutionary spirit are kind of actually proponents, in a way, of the world state. And they're rooted in the esoteric and occult revolutionary movements, which began with the French and American revolutions in the 18th century, and which have continued since. You mentioned Billington's Fire in the Minds of Men, which I have up here behind me. And, I agree with you. I think we recently saw an example of this when General Michael Flynn at a Patriot event offered an explicitly occult and theosophic prayer masked as a Christian prayer, and the exact words that he used, someone actually found a copy from like 30 years ago of some New Age occultists reciting that basically the same thing that Michael Flynn was saying, which was really kind of weird. And so, could you kind of briefly comment or unpack, how America is actually pushing us towards, the New World Order?
Well, that's of course not you, but that analysis. Sometimes I put those kind of titles out there to kind of trigger and kind of get people like clicking on it. So I recognize that not everything about America is evil. I'm not saying that all of Americans are, or there's a lot of positives to America. Obviously, some of the positives would be the founding fathers opposed the banking elite. They understood the power of fiat money printing. Those are positives. They understood that we should be under rule of law, that, the state doesn't grant you your rights. The rights come from God. So all those things are positives. So I don't want to give the impression that I'm like anti-America or I don't appreciate the positives of my country. I do. But at the same time, I also can recognize and be honest about the philosophical problems and flaws in the Enlightenment philosophy that underpins America. So, my training isn't geopolitics, or it's philosophy. So that's the domain that I can speak to most confidently. And if you know Enlightenment philosophy, you know that it's very influenced by the Freemasonic lodges of that time, both the American Revolution and the French Revolution. I did have a lot of actually took several classes on revolutionary philosophy in grad and undergrad. So I had some pretty solid teachers that knew this subject really, really well. And it's not even an area I even care that much about. There was like the certain semesters that I had to pick certain classes. Like, well, I guess this one's the only one that sounds that interesting. So I'll pick, French Revolution. I'll pick modern revolutionary movements. I'll pick Marxism critical theory. So there weren't that many options. So I just kind of had to choose this. So it's kind of accidental that I learned this stuff. But one example of this would be there's a book by Habermas where what's it called? Something about revolutionary. I'll have to find it, but it's like his history of revolutionary philosophy. And what's amazing is that you might think that Habermas would have this negative appraisal of America, but he doesn't. He actually has this very positive appraisal that America is another version of the revolution. Well, that's fascinating because that's what I learned in my French Revolution class, which is that the Jacobins and the Girondins are really just two sides of the same revolutionary coin. And they're just kind of differed a little bit on, things like private property, right? So the Jacobins were more radical. In the French Revolution, when they took power, they just want to kill everybody and basically, behead people and put in this total communistic state. And then in the tradition of the Girondins, you get more of a merchant class sort of, what we might see in, George Washington or somebody like that, where we've got property rights. We've got these sort of, but it's all grounded on the idea of natural law theory, which is a specific Enlightenment idea that comes from a certain train of thought, philosophically speaking, which actually is influenced by Hermeticism. It's actually comes out of a lot of those Hermetic groups and lodges that you were mentioning. And I didn't even, I learned a lot of this stuff before I even had Billington's book. And then I was surprised when I got Billington's book, who's just a sort of normal scholar authority on that subject, because he was the head of the Library of Congress. Like, his second chapter is the occult origins of all of the revolutionary movements. So like literally within like 2 chapters, he goes into this topic. So it shouldn't really be that controversial. People don't know this, but that's the point, is that America is a weird blend of, so to not be overly simplified, it's a blend of, on the one hand, some Christian ideas. It's a blend of English common law, Roman legal theory, canon law actually come into play with the idea of America. Italian Republic philosophy, Machiavelli comes into play with this in terms of like Declaration of Independence and things like that. John Locke, obviously, so as well as Hermetic occult ideas. So it's the bizarrest blend, actually, if you think about it, of all these things. So I think America kind of had different junctures in her history where she could have chosen to go in different directions. And what ended up happening was, and I guess people could debate to what degree this was, always planned. I don't know. I don't have any overall theory about that. But you do have some people that speculated that it could be the sort of launching pad for a utopia, Bacon's New Atlantis kinds of these kinds of ideas. I don't know about all that, but regardless, America chose to go in the direction of being more and more epistemologically self-conscious with the ideas of revolution, as opposed to any of the latent Christian ideas or the canon law ideas that influenced her. So America went in that direction, and she has chosen, especially after the advent of the CFR and all those sort of covert British intelligence operations, to turn America into a policeman of the world, which is what Quigley is talking about. What they did under FDR and all that to set up the national security state, which is the shadow government and all that. So that took America in this direction of basically signing on to being, the global implementer of the New World Order. And what a lot of people don't realize, and this is why I mentioned the critical theory, is that critical theory is one thing that they mention about revolutionary thought that I think is relevant, is that revolution never ends. And so when you have a revolutionary ethos, the next generation has the duty to critique the previous generation. And for the critical theorists, it's called culture critique, right? You never stop. You critique the critique, and then you critique the critique of the critique. So it just keeps going. And that's the point about America, is that America's kind of like the snakeskin that's shed for the New World Order 2.0 to come in. So it's almost like it's meant to die and go away, because the next phoenix from the flame, from the ashes, the phoenix has to rise.
Yeah, I mean, for me, this is fascinating. I know, as you mentioned, we're kind of speculating now, but looking at it long term, before these revolutions, we had, monarchies and kings for millennia. And I think what these revolutions did was overthrow all royalty globally to institute these so-called democratic republics, which with capital, with money now, you can basically, democracies in a way today is become fake. You can just buy off every democracy and manipulate all 193 democratic republics. And that's kind of the way to achieve then the world state, because you create all of these republics, you put them into this like UN institution or whatever, and you control each of them. And that's kind of the mechanism of how to have a world state, which I don't see how otherwise, if you had monarchies or other forms of government, you wouldn't be able to achieve, no?
Well, I mean, maybe. I mean, I think that there's never any perfect scenario. I know you're not saying this, but I mean, there's no like perfect form of government that would necessarily always protect you. But conceivably, there are types of governments that could, but regardless of what would or might be the case, that is historically, factually the case, that the revolutions of the 1700s and 1800s pretty much overthrew most of the world's monarchies and installed the democratic republics, which ironically Plato said a long time ago, and I mean, I'm not an advocate of Plato, but it's funny because he's kind of the model for all the people who, want this technocratic state. It's ultimately Platonic. But Plato said that, like these types of governments are just ridiculous because they're the most susceptible to falling over into anarchy and mob rule, because the control is based on the lowest common denominator, which is the passions. So there's almost this internal impetus to degrade society to make them more malleable and controllable. And lo and behold, that's where we are right now. And so they're going to try to, the goal is to bring in this world state that will be some type of, quasi Platonic republic model. After, of course, there's a mass sort of culling. So, there's going to be, it's maybe beginning right now, the culling of the population in large degree. So that's the fanatical kind of extremism here, is that these are Luciferian technocratic extremists, in my view. And although I can't verify the Pike Mazzini letter, I actually tend to probably think it was true. I think, because it actually explains what's happening and the topic that you brought up. Because if the lodges had in there, I think it's the Knight of Kadash. One of the degrees has the throne, and we have to overthrow throne and altar. And I think it's the Knight Kadash degree of the Scottish Rite, but it's one of those. It doesn't matter. The point is that was the goal. They've done that. And according to Pike and all these people, they do want to institute a kind of new age, a new aeon. The new age movement itself actually comes out of Freemasonic philosophy. And most of the occultists and hermeticists, they've had this idea, even the Satanists have this idea that we're at this sort of turning point age, which again, it all lines up with the global elite writings as well, that we're at this turning point to bring in this new aeon, which will be unlike any of the previous aeons, and especially unlike the last 2,000 years of, Pisces. Now it's going to be the Aquarian age, right? Which will be this sort of, they call it a Luciferian age. So I don't think everybody in the global elite power structure believes that or is on board with that. But if you believe in the Bible, or if you have a spiritual perspective, then that is the ultimate sort of guiding principle for the global government.
Yeah, I agree with you as well. That Pike Mazzini letter, they say it's fake, but it's actually coming to fruition.
Yeah, right.
And other documents, like the report from Iron Mountain, you read it,
exactly.
And it's like they say they're going to create a fake environmental crisis, fake terrorists, right, and a fake alien invasion. Like we've already done 2 of those 3. So, by the way, on the Iron Mountain, you probably heard me say it, but
so that was written as satire. But then Miles Copeland, in his book Game of Nations, says in the introduction that it's actually the report from Iron Mountain satire is based on the Cold War CIA game center. So it is actually based on real meetings and plans, even if that was satire.
Yeah, and on the occult, when I was I've been to the Lucis Trust office in the Lucifer Publishing Company office in Geneva, and I attended one of their meetings, and just so I can, with credibility, talk about this, because when I talk about this, try to talk about it in my classes, people are like, "Oh, you crazy conspiracy theorist," but I'm like, "No, I've got the pamphlet. I actually have it somewhere in a box here from 2009, and it actually says that they handed it out at the meeting that I attended, and it talks about like Lucifer being Prometheus, and it's in there." And it's on their website that they think, Lucifer is basically the Christ or the Messiah.
Well, the Rockefellers put a whole bunch of money, power, influence into the whole, United Nations. They donated the land that the UN building is on in New York, and they, supported that publishing house as well, which used to be called Lucifer Publishing before they changed the name to Lucis Trust. But that was actually one of the first conspiracy things I read back when I was 18 or 19. And I thought that this is wild. This is crazy. But I had gone to New York and I'd visited the UN back when I was a senior in high school, just on a senior trip. So I had seen, if you go to Rockefeller Plaza, you see the giant Prometheus statue. And I think that's intentional, right? I think that's the attitude, that's the mindset of the elites. And so eventually over time, sort of collecting these books, and in the authorized biography of the Rockefellers, they actually talk about co-opting the religious movements, co-opting these entities to basically make churches into NGOs. That's essentially what the multiple chapters in the Collier and Horowitz's Rockefeller book says is that they basically just bought off these movements to steer them into being tools of, soft power, basically Rockefeller soft power.
Yeah, and a lot of that stuff is intentional. I would always frequently visit the old League of Nations building, which is now the UN headquarters in Geneva, and they've got, like, you can see on the map. I was there drinking coffee. The Serpentine Lounge, and in the conference halls, they've got pyramids. So, like, the microphone is a pyramid, and you touch the capstone, and it lights up red, and you speak into it. Like, come on, like, how many coincidences can there be? Pyramid microphones, Serpentine Lounge, and as you say, on the goes Prometheus and so on.
Have you ever been to the one in New York where I want to see that meditation room with a big black cube? Yeah,
I've seen that.
That's weird.
I've never been to New York, but yeah, that'd be interesting to go see that. I think they say Lucis Trust is in charge of that, like, meditation room.
Yeah, isn't that crazy?
Yeah. Getting kind of back to the Great Reset, you've been talking about this. You recently gave an interview on a Bitcoin podcast, and I think you're positive on Bitcoin. I'm still a skeptic and leaning toward it being a globalist Trojan horse. I can't bring myself to come down firmly in either camp. I feel the jury is still out. If over time, Bitcoin does turn out to be a true cypherpunk creation, I'm happy to admit I'm wrong. But for me, it seems to function so well, kind of as a bridge into the cashless society, kind of paving the way for the metaverse. We've had, the 1988 economists cover, the MIT NSA white paper, and so on. But, maybe it is providential and a way for us to survive the Great Reset. Well, what makes you think it's not a globalist related project?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one thing I would say is that my initial analysis was what you said. I thought that was probably the case when I first heard about Bitcoin back in about 2012, 13. I remember Max Kaiser would be on Alex, talking all about Bitcoin, and it's only $1. You better get in and all this stuff. And I thought, they're never going to let, even if it was what they said, it's never going to be anything. They would shut that down or whatever. And so the more I learned about it, the more I looked into it, the more nuanced, the more kind of complex I saw that this is. And I'm certainly no economic expert. I'm not a master of blockchain technology or anything like that. But my understanding is that so there's different types of blockchain technologies, and so there's nothing inherently, in my view, there's nothing inherently bad about blockchain itself that would necessarily make it evil any more than the internet itself, is something evil. So we already kind of use. If the argument was that it's necessarily going to lead to a cashless society, well, the internet would be the same problem. So we should, by that logic, I'm not dissing you, but I'm just saying that, and maybe we should get rid of the internet one day. I don't know. Maybe if we have, an EMP or a super cyber polygon, maybe the internet will go away. We'll be living in it. I think Klaus actually said the other day something like, I don't know if I'm remembering this right, but something like, there will be the smart cities. Everyone else will live like it is the 1800s. So maybe we will be living in prairie land, and it'll be like, Little House on the Prairie or something. I don't know if we are allowed to live, right? If the robots don't come kill us in our log cabins or whatever, we'll be fighting robots with shotguns and log cabins. Anyway, that actually might be a good idea for a sci-fi story, but, so Bitcoin, I think, has its own kind of network and its own blockchain system. And if you look at what Klaus actually a couple months ago, they put out their statement, World Economic Forum, on the 5 cryptos that they want. And what's interesting about the projects that they recommended, it was like Algorand, Stellar Lumen, and a few other. Ripple, I think, was on there. Those are all centralized projects. And so those are projects that would be very amenable to what Klaus's ideas are, because it allows a central entity to determine who can be on those networks, shut your coins off potentially. Any of that kind of stuff is the power of the centralized blockchains and networks. And the idea with Bitcoin and DeFi and these kinds of things is decentralization. So the first thing I would say is that I don't think that there's a reason why Klaus didn't mention Bitcoin. He did mention these other centralized projects. And if you read Klaus's Fourth Industrial Revolution, in the last section where he talks about the Internet of Things, blockchain, nano chipping of everyone, et cetera, He basically says some of the same stuff, that we need a centralized blockchain technology whereby we can do this kind of control. So that's why I think Klaus and company don't mention Bitcoin. Other allies of his, like Mr. Gates, he actually says we got to get rid of Bitcoin. Hillary the other day, let's get rid of Bitcoin. It's destroying the dollar. So I think that crowd they realize the disruption potential and for Bitcoin. And I am not saying that that makes all. So in other words, crypto is its own kind of universe with bad projects, evil projects, good projects. It's a battle kind of right now. And so part of what will determine, I think, the future is which projects people adopt. So there's kind of a war right now for media, propaganda, attention, getting people onto trying to convince them of bad projects. There's a lot of these nefarious, evil, scammy, centralized projects that are out there. And that's precisely why I changed my opinion. So, I think we're going to have to conform to this reality. It'd be like, in 1998, passing around flyers, like, don't get on the internet, right? I mean, we're going to be on the internet. There's going to be currencies and currency wars. We're already in currency wars right now. So right now, fiat money is a scam, and it's the global systems, control. So if we understand the hard asset nature of Bitcoin, what it is, just compared to fiat, is way superior, right? And it's even better than gold, I think. So. And I don't think that you have to be either one or the other. I mean, I think that you can have gold and Bitcoin. You can have silver and Bitcoin. You can have other projects that you research and look into. Maybe, even if Ethereum is somewhat centralized, there's other projects on Ethereum that are decentralized finance. So not everything. It's a huge grab bag basically, and it's a war going on right now. So that's why it's nuanced, and that's why it's not necessarily any more than you going on your phone and using your bank app, to pay your bills. I mean, that's cashless society already right there. So if we're going to have e-money, we might as well choose the most secure, the most decentralized, the most non-manipulatable currency. And I do understand that at this stage early on, we're still early. There are whales who own a lot of Bitcoin who can influence the market. So there's no system, though, that is perfect in the sense that nobody can manipulate it. Nobody can. I mean, even in terms of gold, there can be more gold added to the supply by mining. You can have tungsten. You can have all these different ways to manipulate gold as well. Gold notes can be manipulated. So I think that even in terms of manipulation, in comparison to gold and fiat, Bitcoin is still superior in that regard, because even with whale manipulation, in terms of that really just causes price fluctuations. So that's why I still think that overall it's one of the best bets for people who want to have an alternative to the fiat scam system. And really, there's no other refuge right now. I mean, there could be gold, but gold is less secure than Bitcoin, because you can have your Bitcoin offline. You can know your seed phrases, and it's in here, right? So you can't put your gold in here, right? I mean, your gold might be stored in Jack Sparrow's desert island, some island off of the coast of Tortuga or something, or maybe you've got it buried somewhere, but the government can still go find that, right? And so I think that, again, and yeah, ultimately, if they really want to, I guess the government could take you and torture you and get your seed phrases or whatever. But what I'm saying is that there's better and best. There's no perfect silver bullet. But anyway, that's my 5-minute spill on Bitcoin.
Yeah, I'm kind of on the fence, as I mentioned. And I have no idea. Bitcoin can go to the moon. It can collapse tomorrow. It just kind of makes me think of, everyone knows G. Edward Griffin's Creature from Jekyll Island. Life is strange. 10 years ago, he took me out to lunch at California Pizza Kitchen. I was volunteering for his newsletter, Unfiltered News, like in 2008, 9, and 10. And I was going out to LA to see to hang out, and his assistant said, "Hey, Ed wants to meet you, as a thanks kind of for volunteering." And so I got to have lunch with Ed Griffin, and he mentions in his book how when they tried to create the Federal Reserve Act in 1913, they kind of played this strategy, the bankers, where they had the senator come out and make it look like the bankers were against the Federal Reserve Act, so the population would think it's a good thing, it's not a bad thing. And that was kind of like their strategy of getting the Federal Reserve formed, which, again, as I said, who knows? Maybe that could be their strategy today with Hillary and Bill Gates and Hillary Clinton coming out saying, "Oh, Bitcoin bad, we don't want it." But
yeah, I mean, I understand the 66-degree chess game that might be okay, but if you think about, like, I mean, we know that they run the fiat system, right? And we know that that's a scam. And if you just think, I mean, I'm not saying that you're doing this or this wrong, but I do think that sometimes a lot of us in this domain, we can overanalyze to where we double, get a second guess, and we kind of maybe miss our initial correct intuitions, which is that Bitcoin is not fiat. It's a hard asset. It's the hardest asset because it's a way to store energy and value over time. The fiat system, even according to the Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars document, is itself a weapon. So it points out that the energy loss over time through inflation is intentional to destroy and sap and take people's wealth and value and energy over time. It's a prison mechanism. It even says it's an enslavement prison mechanism. And so if we understand what Bitcoin is, again, apart from, well, we just simply, like, maybe there's some, amorphous secret backdoor, which, again, we don't know that exists. We've not seen anything like that. So taking it, at least as it's presented, it's the hardest asset. It's not subject to any inflation, debasement. It can't be inflated. Like, just on those metrics alone, like, why would it not be superior to the fiat system? Or are you saying that, well, fiat's bad and Bitcoin's bad, and so, I mean, maybe you think that it should be a gold only standard? But again, if Bitcoin is superior even to gold, unless we want to go back to 1800s and get rid of the internet, which I don't think is really plausible, I don't see why we wouldn't prefer this system just on the metrics of, like, the hardness of the asset. The Bitcoin can't be inflated. Fiat system is and will continue to be running up this debt. That's just unsustainable. So, like, why wouldn't we want a system that operates that way? Unless, I mean, what I hear you saying is that you're basically just suspicious of the origins, or are you suspicious of blockchain technology, or are you suspicious of the brand of Bitcoin, or what is really the origin of the suspicion?
No, I mean, my suspicion is only that it could be the origin of either blockchain or Bitcoin, because that could be kind of serve as a bridge to take us to the CBDCs and the cashless society. Because if we didn't have this huge run up in cryptos and people getting rich, and if they just came one day and said, we're in the old analog kind of world using cash, and the bankers and elites are like, hey, we're gonna go switch to a cashless society, everyone's gonna be like, no. But now that they've kind of whet our appetite, again, this is just one scenario for me.
Right.
And I'm more of a practical person where I'll use crypto. If I can get a use out of it, I accept donations in Bitcoin and Ethereum. So I'm using it. And there are people that are more dogmatic about it. I've interviewed Alison McDowell, who does a lot of really good work, but she's very, like, she says, she recently commented that she said that she won't go on do any more interviews with anyone associated with Rockfin. So because Rockfin's all like using the tokens and crypto now and blockchain, and so I guess I won't get to interview her anymore. She does great work, but again, you mentioned that same logic, where that means I can't use the internet, what I'm doing now, or I was making the joke that even if I decided to go live in some cabin in the woods, and I'd have to build it. Probably, the tool that I bought from the hardware store comes from some company that where the CEO has attended Bilderberg, right? Some monopoly corporations. It's like you can't escape, even if you go. You need that hammer made from Home Depot or whatever to So
yeah, but I mean, Bitcoin is not, purely speaking, non-existent, or I mean. You could write down, you can go to Bitcoin ATM and you can get a piece of paper that has you can have a form of cash or paper even with cryptocurrency. So it's it has multiple uses and functions and means and modes. So I don't really understand. That's again, I think an incorrect objection that, well, it'll bring us on to this. Well, but if that's the case, then your bank having an app where you pay your bills electronically is a step to the cashless system. So by that logic, we shouldn't be using banks. We shouldn't be using any apps to pay for things. And yet here we are doing it. Again, I don't think that it's a question of which of these technologies are we going to choose, which ones are going to be decentralized or hard assets. Bitcoin is unique in that regard, in that it's the one that is not just first, but it's the hardest of the assets. So I still don't see why. In other words, every argument they would make against Bitcoin seems to return tenfold on the fiat system, from my view. And by the way, the central banks are going to be forced to create the CBDCs because of the challenge of Bitcoin. I mean, that they're doing that, in my view, because, they want people on a cashless society, and they want people on FedCoin, Klaus Coin, and all the ones that he recommends, which, again, none of those people like Bitcoin.
I'm getting down to one of my last questions, kind of the question I tend to ask all of my guests. A key to figuring out how to survive is understanding these plans and projects is what you've been doing and what I've been doing for myself for many years, reading the elites stuff. And so, if you can kind of extrapolate what are their plans and what they're trying to do, you can kind of plan better for yourself, your own kind of sort of reaction, survival, getaway plans, and so forth. And someone we've both interviewed and I'm looking to get on again, for example, Jim Jatras. I think he's gone to like a full country homestead, and I'm wanting to do the same. What are your thoughts kind of on bracing for impact of the Great Reset and the metaverse and all of this stuff in the coming years? And as you mentioned, like I don't have anything against having gold, silver, Bitcoin, just using whatever means possible to stay afloat.
Yeah, a lot of my friends are into homesteading. That's not my personality. I'm not a farm kind of guy. I don't live in a city. I live in a small town. But I would say, I mean, if you're looking to have a family, if you're looking to have a normal, healthy, traditional, organic lifestyle, then homesteading is great for people that can do that. I do think that, I mean, I have, storable food. I mean, I never thought I would be like the prepper type. I'm not a prepper, strictly speaking, because I'm just not a survivalist kind of dude. But I mean, I have had to kind of move into, we got a generator, we got storable food, just to be prepared for the reality of, the electrical grid going down, war, these kinds of things, which do, they are possible. So I would say, easiest, best case scenario, try to get out of big cities, try to get to the country. Doesn't mean you have to go live on a farm, but, move in a small town. I mean, I think that a lot of small towns will probably be safe. If things get really bad, they'll be your best bet. Being as off grid as possible in terms of self-sufficient, having maybe even a lot of my friends have animals. They have, cows, chickens, this kind of stuff. I don't have that, but, people all around me have that. So that's why, gold, silver, Bitcoin, guns, those are your best bets.
Yeah, that's kind of like what most of the people I talk to say. Any final thought for us?
No, I mean, really glad that you had me on. I'm ashamed that I didn't realize you had a podcast. It's not for, I follow your Telegram pretty closely, so I just missed it, but I'm looking forward to digging into your interviews, and honored that you had me, and it was a great discussion.
And people can find you at jaysanalysis.com and subscribe to your in-depth analysis you do there for, I think it's $5 a month or $60 a year. And they can find you on Rockfin, as well as you host the 4th hour of InfoWars, I think, once a week. So what are the best places to find you? And, maybe tell us about your main offering, your membership.
Yeah, basically, it's just you get access to 5 or 6 years of me just kind of summarizing and analyzing the books, doing a lot of the interviews similar to what you've done. It's not just that. There's also movie analyses. There's also weird humor, comedy, satire. There's all kinds of stuff that we've been doing for the last several years. And then we did a TV show based on my first book, Hollywood Decoded, over at Gaia. There is my 2 books in the shop, which you can get. My wife has her books, which she does similar analysis to me. And yeah, so you get access to that archive. And then, yeah, I do other exclusive things over on Rockfin. So there's the Rockfin content as well. So I would say definitely sign up over on Rockfin. And yeah, that's what we do: film, philosophy, geopolitics, theology. We cover all that stuff. We do debates with atheists, Muslims. We have a lot of public debates. So yeah, you can find all that over at my website, jaysanalysis.com.
All right, everyone, check that out.
Oh, can I give a shout out to my sponsor too, which is chalk.com, which is our male supplements, also for women too, but we do a lot of healthy, organic type keto carnivore diet type stuff. And so they're a great combination with people who adopt that kind of a diet and lifestyle. So they're anti big soy. They're definitely pro-masculine. They're pro-toxic masculinity. So if you want to increase your toxicity in terms of your toxic masculinity, you can go to chalk.com and get access to their supplements and use the promo code J60 to get 60% off.
Yeah, I've seen you posting that on Telegram. Although down here in Mexico, I use iherb.com, which is easier to get supplements here, but otherwise they charge you a fortune, the Mexican customs to get supplements in. And yeah, as I said, everyone check out jaysanalysis.com. I hope to continue this conversation with you sometime in 2022. And danke for being on Geopolitics and Empire, and keep on rocking in the not so free world.
You too, man. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this Geopolitics and Empire podcast interview. The website is geopoliticsandempire.com, and I encourage you to sign up for the free email list through which you can receive an update of every new podcast, as well as a long list of key news headlines once a week. We're being heavily censored. YouTube has deleted some of our videos, and we currently have 1 strike. Patreon has terminated our account. Facebook has restricted our page, and Reddit has been deleting posts. Our favorite social media channels are Telegram and Twitter. The best places to watch the podcast beyond YouTube are on Odyssey, BitChute, and Brighteon. The best places to listen to the podcast are on SoundCloud, Apple, Spotify, Google, or on any other podcast app. To help keep this podcast alive, leave a review on Apple Podcasts and wherever else. Subscribe to all our platforms and leave a donation if possible via Subscribestar, PayPal, Bitcoin, or Ethereum. You can also find us on MeWe, Minds, Gab, Float, VK, LinkedIn, and Instagram. Thanks for listening.